Hey, how's it going, guys? It is December 25th of the year 2024, and it's actually the first night of Hanukkah, so happy Hanukkah. Um, this is my second devotional for the Watchmen group, and I did like making a video, a little easier to get my thoughts in order, so I thought, let's try it again. Who knows, maybe I'll get to the point where I can figure this camera out. But anyway, devotional. I'm thinking a lot about what I should give for devotional this week. And I don't know about anybody else, but life has been absolutely insane lately between being sick and work and family, and holiday season's always crazy. And if I'm being 100% honest, it is not always convenient to make time for spiritual things. Life can get hectic, and sometimes you just want to hit the snooze button a couple extra times and then race to work. But I know how important it is to spend time in the Word each and every day, even if it's just 5 minutes, you know. And so over the past 5-6 months, beloved brother of mine challenged me to this thing. It was the concept of, it's like 7 minutes with God or something like that. Basically taking 7 minutes of your morning to prayer and reading the Word, like one chapter, and that's it. And since starting that, I've gotten to the point where in the mornings, I am reading a chapter in the New Testament, and in the evenings, I'm reading a chapter in the Old Testament. And that works for me. It's structure, I guess. It's sometimes you got to get the discipline in place before. I guess the easiest way to say is you're not always going to want to do this stuff. Your flesh is not going to want the spiritual things, and life is going to get in the way as much as it can. And I'll admit, here lately, I have had to force myself to read. And I've basically been in the mindset of, I don't care what my flesh says. The Spirit says, chase after me. The Spirit says, seek me. The Spirit says, the Word says, to pursue God. Like, how does the correct way to put it? Walk in the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Sometimes walking in the Spirit looks like dragging yourself, kicking and screaming, and opening the Word, even if your flesh doesn't want to do it. Now, I'd hope as we exercise that the Spirit will begin to get stronger and overcome the flesh. Speaking from personal experience, it's not the easiest thing. But I've said to a few people before that when it comes to crucifying your flesh daily, seeking after the Father daily, death isn't supposed to be convenient. It's not supposed to be pleasant. It's not supposed to feel good. Death is excruciating. It is hard. It is unfathomable. And the Scripture doesn't just tell us to die to our flesh. It says crucify the flesh with its lusts and desires. One of the most brutal forms of death you can think of. So sometimes spiritual warfare is going to look like you dragging yourself, kicking and screaming into the Word, and I've had to do that a lot lately. And I say all that to say that I've really been struggling to figure out what word I'm supposed to be giving this week. So I started thinking, because in the evenings right now, I'm actually in the book of 2 Samuel now in the evening readings. But the book of 1 Samuel is actually where I kind of want to touch on this week. So like I was saying, it's Hanukkah, a time of rededication, which I think all of us should take this time to pray and seek the Father and be in the Word and listen to what His Holy Spirit is trying to teach us during these 8 days of rededication. Because a lot of people talk about, it was a time of rededicating the temple. We are the temple of God. We should look at rededicating ourselves to Him. And I think that it seems that the common theme this past year has been offense. And there's been some hard things a lot of us have gone through, whether it be in the church community or in our personal lives, our family lives, our work lives even. The spirit of offense has been rampant this past year. Speaking from personal experience, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this can relate. And the thing I'm still learning is that we have a choice of what to do with that spirit of offense. We can allow it to control us, or we can lay these offenses at our Father's feet and cry out to Him and ask for His strength to slay these giants in our life. And that's exactly what offense is a giant. And back in 1 Samuel, we see the story of Saul being set up as king and David being anointed as king, and David and Goliath and Saul chasing David, like all these different things happening in 1 Samuel. And so the concept of slaying giants is in here. The idea of Hanukkah is rededicating ourselves. And I think that with all this offense running rampant, we all really need to take a look inside and use the lens of the Word to examine ourselves and be like, God, where am I falling short? God, where are you strengthening me where I need more strength? Where are you revealing to me that I am weak, that I need strength? Where are you revealing to me that I'm stubborn, where I need humility? Where are you revealing to me all these different things? I mean, if you seek Him with your whole heart, you will find Him, Ask and you will receive. Seek and you'll find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For he who asks receives. He who seeks finds. And to him who knocks it will be open. But it takes dedication. So the idea of Hanukkah being a time of rededicating the altar, rededicating our hearts, rededicating ourselves and our lives, even rededicating our direction. It's not wrong sometimes to sit back and go, God, with my work life, am I where you want me? Or are you calling me out of this place where I'm working? Or are you calling me out of this field entirely? Where am I at with my friend relationships, God? Do I have the people around me who please you and feed your word into me? Are they zapping life out of me or feeding death into me? From the business world, you're the average of the 5 people you hang around the most. So if you hang around a bunch of cussing, drinking, smoking, bar hopping, just worldly people, and you're the one believer in the group, what do you think that's going to do to your faith? I'm just saying, there's a reason that God told Israel not to mix with the nations. He told them when they came into the land, tear down the high places, burn the idols. Do not inquire after how did they worship their gods. Focus on me is what Yahweh wanted them to do. And they didn't listen. And believers as a whole didn't listen. And now we live in a generation and a day where you've got Christmas, a blending. And the most beautiful thing I heard recently with Hanukkah is whereas Christmas is all about compromise. It's giving into the world. Hanukkah is about holding firm to the love of Yeshua and the commandments of Yahweh, saying we will not bow, we will not bend the knee, we will not submit, we will honor our God even if it means our lives. And I think that's amazing. And I'll try my best to keep this shorter, I apologize. But the reason that, let me tie this together. So 1 Samuel, we've got the story of David and Saul and Goliath. This time of year, we've got Hanukkah, a time of rededication. Just a quick thing for, obviously we all know, Hanukkah, you had the Greeks, Antiochus Epiphanes, literally the Antichrist, come into the temple, sacrificed a pig on the altar, erected an image of Zeus, commanded Israel to bow down and worship and eat swine's flesh and to give up the things of God and to submit to the world. And some did. But there were those who resisted, who loved him and guarded his commandments. You know, in Revelation, it says, here's the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of Yahweh and have the testimony of Yeshua, faith and obedience. Those are the end time saints. And these were the same kinds of people that we see in the story of the Maccabees in the time of Hanukkah. And it's the same kind of people that we see here in the story of David and Saul. And as I was looking into this, I noticed a parallel of Saul and David, and then the Jews who submitted during the time of the Maccabees and the Jews who didn't submit during the time of the Maccabees. And then I see this parallel to today. Those who are submitting to the ways of God and holding fast to his commandments, holding fast to the faith in Yeshua and not being willing to bend the knee. And therefore we pursue Hanukkah, which is an extra biblical feast, but it's biblical. We eat clean. We honor his seventh-day Sabbath. We observe Passover and first fruits and atonement and Sukkot and all these other things that are of God. You have those of us that hold fast and we don't bend the knee. And then you have this other group of believers nowadays who submit, who eat swine's flesh. And I mean this in all love, but let's just call a spade a spade. They submit. They eat swine's flesh. They bend the knee. I mean, Santa, when you go back through history, Santa originated partly from Zeus and Odin. Like, come on, like you can't make this up. We are, God shows you the end from the beginning, and history repeats itself. So we're living in a modern day time where the time of the Maccabees and the time of David and Saul are playing out before our eyes. We are literally living out Bible prophecy, Bible stories right now. And I'll show you. So in 1 Samuel, they make Saul king. And we all know that Saul, God ended up taking the spirit from Saul and replacing him as king. So if we go to 1 Samuel chapter 15, that's when Saul spares King Agag of the Amalekites. And I'm going to hit a couple verses here. So chapter 15, we'll just start in verse 1. Samuel also said to Saul, Yahweh sent me to anoint you king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore heed the voice of the words of Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh Sabaoth, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel. Now how he ambushed him on the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant, nursing child, ox, sheep, camel, donkey. And so God commanded, wipe them out, destroy everything. Not even an animal, a nursing infant, wipe them out. That was the commandment of God. Now you skip down a little bit. Verse 7, and Saul attacked the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, which is east of Egypt. Verse 8, he also took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy them. But everything despised and worthless, that they utterly destroyed. So they were, God said, do this. They did the opposite. Not only that, it wasn't like they did it by accident. They were unwilling to utterly destroy them. And of course, anything despised and worthless, of course they destroyed it. But anything that was precious, they kept it. And if you skip down, we'll just continue, verse 10. Now the word of Yahweh came to Samuel, saying, I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me, and has not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried out to Yahweh all night. Now look at that. I regret that I set up Saul as king. What has he done? He's turned back from following me, and has not performed my commandments. Turn back from following me. What is following God? Loving him and keeping his commandments. And he even says there, he's not performed my commandments. God said, do this. Saul did the opposite. And not only did he do the opposite, he was unwilling to yield. You skip down to verse 13. Samuel went to Saul, and Saul said to him, "Blessed are you of Yahweh. I have performed the commandment of Yahweh." Do you see that? Verse 11, he regrets it and says that Saul has not performed my commandments. Verse 13, Saul says, "I have performed the commandments of Yahweh." Verse 14, but Samuel said, "What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" And Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to Yahweh your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed." It's like, "Hey, Saul, are you hard of hearing?" Like, huh? Or like, what's the matter, Saul? Like, you know what God told you to do. Now you're saying, "I've performed the commandment of Yahweh." Oh, and by the way, all those things he said to destroy, yeah, here they are, so we can sacrifice. Like, do you see the scales, the spiritual blindness? And to tie it to today, we have people, "I love God." Okay, well, hey, if you take 5 seconds, you realize that Yeshua wasn't born on Christmas. You realize that none of these things have to do with God, this and that. Well, that's great, but that's when we choose to love Him. That's when we choose this. And I mean, I could go on the tangent of the golden calf incident. I could, but we all know about that. We have people today saying, "I love God," but God said not to worship Him the way the nations worship their gods. God said not to eat swine's flesh. God said not to do X, Y, and Z, and not to mix my worship with those of the nations. And yet we see with just 2 to 3 minutes of a Google search, that's exactly what Christmas is. Yet people are sitting here, "Happy birthday, Jesus. I'm so glad it's Christmas." I don't know if anybody else, but that was a song that we used to do. I remember being in elementary school or in Sunday school. "Happy birthday, Jesus. I'm so glad it's Christmas. Na 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 na. And the real gift is you. Happy birthday, Jesus. Jesus, I love you." We're indoctrinated as children that we're singing this, and it's just our hearts are just in it, And it's sad because we see the same thing with Saul here, where it's almost like there's a spiritual blindness there. But something else, I never noticed this until I was looking back through here. When I noticed it, I started looking through all these verses, and I want you to see something, because I'm going to read verse 15 again. And Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and oxen to sacrifice to Yahweh your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed." Let me ask you this. What is Saul king of? He's king of Israel, right? Yahweh's the God of Israel, right? And Saul's the king of Israel. Would Yahweh not be Saul's God? And what does the scriptures talk about? You will know them by their fruits. Yeshua in the New Testament was like, if you were the sons of Abraham, you would do the works that Abraham did. And I'm paraphrasing here, but then he talks about, you are of your father, the devil. Yeshua correlated your obedience and your fruits to who was your God, who was your father. So it's like, if you do the things of God, you are God's people. If you don't, you are of the devil. You're of the world. He is not your God. Do this, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. And here, that last bit of verse 15. To sacrifice, this is Saul talking to Samuel now, to sacrifice to Yahweh your God, and the rest we've utterly destroyed. When I noticed that, I started paying attention. We're going to keep going here. So we're going to skip down to verse 18. And this is Samuel reiterating things to Saul. "Now Yahweh sent you on a mission and said, 'Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed,'" which is another word for exterminated. In verse 19, "Why then did you not obey the voice of Yahweh?" Hang on. "Why then did you not obey the voice of Yahweh? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of Yahweh?" So they just correlated Saul's disobedience to evil. And Saul said to Samuel, "But I have obeyed the voice of Yahweh." Hello? "And gone on the mission on which Yahweh sent me, and brought back Agag, the king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites." Verse 3. "Go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man, woman, infant, nursing child, ox, sheep, camel, donkey." Verse 20, Saul said, "I have obeyed the voice of Yahweh and gone on the mission which Yahweh sent me, and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites." Now verse 21, But the people took of the plunder, sheep and oxen, the best of the things which should have been utterly destroyed. Saul admits they should have been utterly destroyed. To sacrifice to Yahweh your God in Gilgal. There he is again, Yahweh your God. He doesn't say our God, my God, your God. So Samuel said, verse 22. Again, chapter 15 of 1 Samuel, verse 22. So Samuel said, has Yahweh as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of Yahweh? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry, because you have rejected the word of Yahweh. Now, who's the word of Yahweh, by the way? Yeshua. Because you have rejected Yeshua, he also has rejected you from being king. And of course, then Saul, verse 24, I've transgressed the commandment of Yahweh in your words because I have feared the people and obeyed their voice. He feared the people and obeyed their voice. Number one, he's not taking ownership. Number two, he's admitting out of fear, I submitted. What happened during the time of the Maccabees? Out of fear, the Jews submitted to Antiochus Epiphanes for fear of their life. Of course, verse 28, so Samuel said to him, Yahweh has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to the neighbor of yours who is better than you. And also the strength of Israel, which that's a capital S, Yeshua, obviously, the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent, for he is not a man that he should relent. And we're not done. So, of course, another thing is Saul didn't repent. He should have turned around and taken care of business. And said Samuel, as we go through, Samuel ends up hacking Agag to pieces. Verse 35, and Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and Yahweh regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. God said, do this. Saul blatantly did not. Not only did Saul blatantly not do what Yahweh said, he claims he didn't obey because of fear, also passed the buck to the people. And of course, it just blows my mind that through all this thing, he's going, but I have obeyed the voice of Yahweh. And it blows my mind that, let's see, 1, 2. I know of at least 2 or 3 times I saw through here where it was Yahweh your God, Yahweh your God. Saul never claimed Yahweh as his God, and that's scary. Now, I know the video is a little longer than I wanted, but I want to flip through, which I actually want to touch on one verse here. In chapter 16 of 1 Samuel when David's anointed king. Verse 7 says, but Yahweh said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For Yahweh does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but Yahweh looks at the heart. And then at the end of verse 13 it says, and the Spirit of Yahweh came upon David from that day forward. So we see a contrast. We see a man like Saul who bent the knee, who turned away from the commandments of God, who lied to himself, saying, I have obeyed the voice of Yahweh, when clearly he hasn't. We have an entire group of people today who says, but I do love God. Well, then why aren't you keeping his commandments? Why have you replaced his appointed times with the things of the world? Why can you sit here and admit, well, I know Yeshua wasn't born on December 25th, but, X, Y, and Z. And it's just like Saul, just spiritual blindness. So we see Saul correlated to modern day and to the time of the Maccabees. But then we also see David correlated to modern day and the time of the Maccabees. God looks at the heart. Spirit of Yahweh came upon David from that day forward. So as you're going through 1 Samuel, we get to the story of David and Goliath. And in chapter 17, Goliath has been going after, you got the armies of Israel, the armies of the Philistines. And Goliath has been coming out taunting the people of God day after day. And Israel, we know the story. David comes out to bring stuff to his brothers. Verse 26, and David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done of the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David's zealous for the things of God. Verse 32, David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. David's willing to go to battle and hold the ground for the things of God. And then Saul, of course, is worried about David, and starting in verse 34. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Verse 37, moreover, David said, Yahweh, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and Yahweh be with you. David's confident in God. The Spirit of Yahweh is with him. David is zealous for the things of God. Those of us who are chasing after loving Yeshua and keeping his commandments these days have a zeal for the things of God. Time of the Maccabees, there was a remnant who wouldn't bend the knee. They were zealous for the things of God to the point where not only them, but their families were being tortured in front of them, and they were going, hold the line. Do not bend the knee. And when David makes these statements, you go down to verse 40. And David doesn't just say he believes, he puts action to his faith, fruit to his faith. And then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, which we know that David, if I remember correctly, David had 5 brothers. Or not David, sorry. Goliath had 5 brothers. So David was preparing for the battles he knew was going to come after this. Just saying. Like, that's a good point. Took 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's bag in a pouch which he had, and a sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. David's ready to go to war. But of course, he doesn't go with, I'm just going to read. Verse 43. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Verse 45 is what I want to hone in on. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of Yahweh Sabaoth, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day Yahweh will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcass of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that Yahweh does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is Yahweh's, and he will give you into my hands, into our hands. Skipping down to verse 49. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of his sheath, took Goliath's own sword and killed him, and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that the champion was dead, they fled. David put his faith not in the tools that he had, or in the tools that he didn't have. He put his faith in the God of Israel, in the God that he knew, that he had a relationship with. He went to battle with faith. And he had seen God, when he's talking to Saul about, I slayed the lion, I slayed the bear when I was looking over my father's sheep. Those were times where God was revealing himself to David all the way back then. So I'd like to ask you guys, maybe you haven't thought about it, but maybe there's times in your life where God has actually been revealing himself to you in little things, in your job, in your family, in your friendships, in your relationships, in your marriage, in your church relationships, in your interactions with people day to day. Maybe there's little instances where God has actually been revealing himself to you and preparing you for something greater, and you didn't realize it at the time. So I would say think back and look at that. What were your lion and your bear moments in your life? And could it be that if we are struggling with the spirit of offense right now, if we are in this day and age where the things of God are going out the window and we're looking more and more like the world, if we know Yeshua is coming back soon, and maybe this time that we're all experiencing all of this offense, all of these things that are happening just in our own church community, could it be that this is the time when we need to remember the things that God has shown us in times past so that we can be ready to fight this? And I want to tie something in here, because the idea of slaying the giants in your life. The time of the Maccabees and the people that died by the sword, some of them died, yes, but they were slaying giants at that point. The giant of fear, the giant of submission, the giants of bending the knee, of succumbing to the things of the world, to look more like the world. They stood their ground. They stood against their Goliath and said, no, we will not bend the knee. We come to you in the name of Yahweh. Nowadays, we're experiencing a spiritual version of this again, where a lot of us are waking up to the things of God, to love him and keep his commandments. And we're going, we will not submit, we will not bend the knee, we will not conform to the world with your Christmas and your Easter and your Halloween and all of these things that God clearly says in his word are abominable or not of him or of the world. We're having this moment again where we're awakening to these things of God. And God's calling us to obey than to sacrifice. God's calling us to stand on his word. Just like the Maccabees did, just like David did. Just like, here's the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yeshua. There's a remnant in the end days. We are going to experience Hanukkah again. Like, we're going to experience this time of the Antichrist killing the people of God. And many will fall away. Many will give way to this. But hold firm. Why? I just want to reiterate. You come to me with sword and with spear and with javelin, but I come to you in the name of Yahweh Sevaot, the God of armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Like, I mean, I guess it all ties into, are we ready to slay our giants? Are we ready to trust God in these things? Are we willing to die for our faith? Are we willing to lose friends and lose family? Are we willing to lose our jobs if it means loving him and keeping his commandments? If you've bent over backwards and you've tried and you've tried and you've tried, and your boss is still refusing to give you Sabbaths off, is mocking you, is refusing to, do things, yeah, there may be an extent where God's calling you to stay and be a light, but at what point are you willing to walk away from that job that is keeping you from fully loving God and keeping his commandments? At what point are you willing to have that healthy boundary with that family member who just mocks you constantly? Or you've tried to witness, this walk with them. And there's a difference between, hey, I've shared with my family the thing about Christmas and Hanukkah and this and that, and they just da-da-da-da-da. There's a difference between they're just haven't gotten there yet versus the family members that some of us may have that mock us or do things out of spite. Maybe you're getting called to walk away from that. And I'm going to stop before I go too far down a rabbit hole, because I also just realized how long this devotional is. Sorry, guys. Sorry. I'm just going to tie it all together. Like I said, Saul and David, the time of the Maccabees, with Antiochus Epiphanes, today, with those of us who believe in the front and the back of the book, and those who conform to the world, what I call mainstream Christianity, and then a time in the future Hanukkah of the Antichrist, and of a great falling away, and there being a remnant who hold fast to the commandments and the faith. And we can choose which camp we're in. We can choose to be Saul or David. We can choose to be the Jews that bent the knee to Antiochus or the Maccabees. We can choose to be mainstream Christians today or those who love God and keep his commandments. And in the future, because I do believe we are the generation that will see the coming of Messiah, we can choose to fall away or to hold fast to our faith. Choose this day who you will serve. And as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh, the God of Israel. Sorry for the long one, guys. I just want to challenge you to really think about that. And yeah. Seek a David's heart.